We are again continuing our NHL offseason plan series. Now we're on to the number 7th best team from the NHL's regular season, the Pittsburgh Penguins. They've already been quite busy, and the offseason is just starting to heat up. What else will Jim Rutherford do to make this team better for next year? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as we mentioned, we're on to the number 7 team now, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Obviously, the Penguins have been a very busy team so far. As I mentioned, we're going to have a lot to recap already. There's not going to be quite as many questions for the Penguins as we had for other teams because Jim Rutherford has already offered us quite a few answers on what his plans are. He was wasting no time when his offseason got underway. So let's first start by recapping the 1920 season. We're going to look at their cap space as of right now and discuss what else is Jim Rutherford going to do before next season. We can see here the Penguins had a really solid regular season with a record of 40 wins, 23 losses, 6 overtime losses for 86 points, ranked number 7 overall in the NHL. So overall, a pretty solid year. Of course, when the NHL came back to play their 2020 NHL Stanley Cup Playoff format, the play-in series, so the Penguins had to play the lowest-ranked Montreal Canadiens in the play-in series in the Eastern Conference, and they lost. So that's an utter disappointment for Pittsburgh. Obviously, they did not come back to lose to Montreal. They are going to have a different kind of situation here where the Penguins were in the draft lottery for the first time in a long time. Obviously, they had a first-round pick that was quite high. Of course, that pick has since been traded, but obviously, at this point, the Penguins had a good regular season with a major disappointing end here in the playoffs, which they've had now for a few years in a row. Ever since the 2017 Stanley Cup was hoisted, they've had multiple playoff blunders. So now it's time for Jim Rutherford to shake things up. We've already seen the beginnings of that. Now we're going to look at what else he's going to do. So before we get into that, let's take a look here at the remainder of their team stats and then get into their cap space and other contracts that are expiring. Now, their team stats here are as follows. We had 224 goals for, 196 goals against for a plus 28. So, obviously, that's pretty solid. That's really good. Obviously, they're a highly offensive team, and the goals against were pretty good as well. Power play was number 16th best in the NHL at 19.9. So, not awesome, but pretty average, and I get the job done when it needed to. And the penalty killing was pretty solid as well. Number 10 overall, 82.1%. So for the most part, special teams were good. They weren't great, but they were good, and they were certainly got the job done more often than not. Now, with all the moves that we've already seen here from Pittsburgh, let's quickly take a look and see where their cap space sits today. What else is remaining for contracts that are expiring? And then we'll recap what moves Rutherford's already made and what else is he going to do before this is all over. Now, as of right now, the Penguins have $6.13 million in salary cap space. They have 20 players under contract for next season. So even though they have a fair bit of contracts that are expiring, they have a lot of other guys already on the roster here, at least with cap friendly as well. Some of these players are players who might have been recalled from the minors or could be sent down or whatever as well, or could be on injury reserve. So obviously they always do that during the offseason portion here. So let's take a look at the contracts. Who's the RFAs and UFAs for this Penguin roster? Now, looking at the UFAs, it's not a very big list, and we might not see any of these guys come back. We've got veteran Patrick Marleau. Marleau almost guarantees does not return. He could re-sign in San Jose, assuming he's going to continue playing. Hard to say what he does, but his time in Pittsburgh is up. We have Connor Sherry and Justin Schultz. We already know for sure Justin Schultz is not coming back. Sherry, I'd say, is a maybe, but probably not. I think they obviously brought him back from Buffalo in the second stint of the team. There's a small chance they sign him, but given the fact that we're so close to free agency and he's not signed yet, tells me that he probably isn't returning. Obviously, they have a lot of forwards under contract already, so it's difficult to say what their plans are. Now, in the RFA world, we got both their goaltenders, including Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry. Obviously, goaltending is a highly debated topic for this team, and we'll discuss momentarily here what we expect them to do in that regard. We've also got some other players like Dominique Simon, Sam Lafferty, and Anthony Angelo. So I would suspect all those RFAs do get contracts and get re-signed by the team. Obviously, most of them, except for Simon, could certainly be able to play in the minors at this point as well, and they'd be waivers exempt. So certainly not too many contracts there of anything too substantial besides the goaltending that the Penguins really need to look after. Now let's do a quick recap here of what moves we've already seen from Jim Rutherford and what are the other remaining burning questions for this franchise. Now, of course, we've already seen a few trades. We saw the big trade to kick things off, which was one of the bigger first ones of the offseason, was with the Toronto Maple Leafs, where they acquired Kasperi Kapanen from the Toronto Maple Leafs. They gave up, obviously, Evan Rodriguez. They gave up Philip Hallander, and they also gave up their 2020 first-round selections. A pretty high price to pay, but they clearly see Kapanen being a top 6 forward for them, getting a chance to play with either Sid or Malkin. So obviously they feel he's worth it. He's got a lot of potential. Of course, he was originally a Penguin before he ever went to the Leafs, and now he's back to where he started. So we'll see how that works out. Now, we also saw a few other deals from Rutherford, including center iceman Nick Bjugstad being shipped to Minnesota. They traded Bjugstad to Minnesota for future consideration. So basically, at this point, they may not get much of anything back. They kind of gave him away, and they even added a draft pick and retained some salary. So that was a pure salary dump to move Bjugstad along to Minnesota. And then they made the somewhat confusing trade, I will say, just here in the past couple of days, where they acquired defenseman Mike Matheson from the Florida Panthers, along with forward Colton Seaver, in exchange for Patrick Hornqvist. Now, as I mentioned in that trade video, I wasn't super shocked or surprised that any of these players were traded, but I was surprised that they were traded for each other. Patrick Hornqvist even had to waive his no-trade clause, which he gladly did, because he said, if Pittsburgh doesn't want me, then I don't want to be here. Like, he was really blindsided by that trade and seemed quite upset by the whole scenario and how it all unfolded. So that was not really great from that standpoint, but unfortunately, he was moved along, and it makes sense to a degree. The fact that he's older, getting paid a lot of money, they don't see him being in a top 6 or the first power play unit anymore, so it didn't make sense for them to want to have that contract on the book. So I understand all that, but I'm just not real pleased with the players coming back. Like Matheson, they already have Jack Johnson, and maybe Jack Johnson gets moved, I don't know, but they're clearly wanting to revamp their blue line. That's a given here. But Matheson was a bit of a turnover machine before, so we'll see. Maybe Todd Reardon, who they brought back as an assistant coach to work with the defense, will be able to help mold him into being a stronger defender, because he did start off as an NHL career. Ever since he gets suspended for that situation with Elias Pettersson, he seems like he's kind of changed a bit, and he's been a little bit more hesitant back there. So we'll see what happens with Matheson. Maybe Reardon can help him out and get back on track, but it's kind of a very confusing move there by Jim Rutherford. He also signed forward Jared McCann to a 2-year, $2.9 million deal, and McCann's another name that's been mentioned in trade rumors as well. So just because he's signed doesn't mean he's not going anywhere. He could be the number 3 center. He could also be a winger. Not sure exactly where he fits there, so we'll see what happens with the Penguins and McCann, but he is under contract now at least. Obviously, the other big burning question that's not yet been answered is how are they going to handle the goaltending situation? And it seems pretty clear that Matt Murray is going to be traded. Tristan Jarry is going to be signed. They just don't have the cap space to give Murray the kind of contract he wants. He's easily going to be looking for $5 or $6 million, at least on a 3, 4, 5 year deal. And they just don't have that option to pay him, in my opinion. He has been inconsistent ever since that 2017 Cup win as well. So if I were Pittsburgh, I would sign Jarry and move on. But that's how things are leaning right now in Pittsburgh. But we'll see what happens. There's been no shortage of interest in Murray. We've had reports on numerous teams checking into his availability and inquiring on what it might take to make a trade for the young netminders. So we'll see. But either way, almost a guarantee Pittsburgh comes back next year with a different goalie tandem. Of course, with the Matheson acquisition, as I mentioned, they have more than enough capable defensemen, especially on the left side. Rutherford's also gone on record to say that Brian Dumoulin or Marcus Pettersson were not players he would consider trading. So when you throw in Matheson in the mix on the left side, and if he doesn't want to trade Dumoulin, he doesn't want to trade Pettersson, he didn't say anything about Jack Johnson. They've also got Crystal Tang, they got John Marino, they got Chad Ruhwedel. They have more than enough capable defensemen. So it seems likely to me that they might try to take Jack Johnson's contract and package him up either with Murray or find a separate deal for him. I know Rutherford, talked a lot about Johnson when the offseason first began and how he didn't think a lot of the criticism that he received was fair, that he was really fond of his game. I think he was just trying to make him sound better, talk him up to try to increase his trade value. And that's what I thought from day one. And now with all these other moves, and the fact that he was not mentioned when he talked about players he wouldn't trade, he picked up another left shot defenseman who can, play a similar role. I think Johnson's going to be gone if they can find a trade for him. But that is not going to be any easy task. But Rutherford likely is checking into that as we speak. Now, of course, back to goaltending for a second. Let's assume they do trade Matt Murray and they sign Tristan Jarry. He's going to need another goaltender to work with them. If they're going to use Casey DeSmith from the minors, that's a possibility. Or if the news out of Vegas follows through and Marc-Andre Fleury is bought out, would they consider bringing back the Flower on a short-term, pretty cheap contract to mentor Jarry for a year or two to finish out his NHL career? I mean, that's something that's been heavily rumored, that if he is bought out of Vegas, that he could end up back in Pittsburgh if they trade Murray. And I can see that personally as a very likely scenario. But of course, we don't know for sure if he'll be bought out or not. If he is, though, I would think Pittsburgh would be high up on the list of where he's going to end up. Otherwise, if they don't do that, I can see a scenario where they do likely go with Jarry into Smith. But there's so many goaltenders out there on the market right now. They could choose to bring in another goaltender that's more experienced to try to work with the youngster Jarry. He certainly outplayed Murray last year, but he is lacking experience when we get into the playoff time as well. So we'll see what happens, but many of us thought the other day when this Matheson-Hornqvist trade happened that maybe Rutherford's lost his mind. For the most part, he's done some really good deals, but certainly it's not really clear exactly what his intentions are when it comes to what kind of returns we're going to get on some of these trades. So let me know your thoughts on the moves we've already seen from Rutherford and the Penguins and what else we're going to see here before the offseason's over as we get ready for next season. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments and we'll continue discussing further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.